different, and I'm not in an air-conditioned space either. So I have my fan on, and I'm suffering the same as you. No movement of air, just what's next to me. So
Yeah,
I mean, I'm very aware.
for people that don't understand this climate down here, when you get these really warm days, you put the fan on and it basically blows hot air sometimes, doesn't it?
Correct. That's right. That's right. I mean, I was saying recently, I ride a motorbike to move to and fro, and
Uh-huh.
I have never experienced having a hot hair dryer blown on me as I'm traveling 30, 40, 50 kilometers down the road. It's bonkers.
Yeah.
It's absolutely bonkers having hot air. It's really weird.
Yeah, and it's not the hottest of days today. I just checked before I came through, and it's about 32 degrees in the shade where I am,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is, it's almost fresh, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty standard for here. I mean, for me, it's the humidity that's the problem. I went for a 10-minute walk to go to a
Yeah,
client's house, and by the time I got back, I was dripping in sweat, which is the bit
yeah,
that's not so fun. I don't mind the heat, but it's the humidity. So, yeah,
yeah,
it's
and
quite muggy.
the humidity does vary quite a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Some days, well, you notice it whether you're sweating or not.
yes,
And some days it's hot but dry, and other days, as you say, you don't have to do anything, and you just start sweating and dripping,
you're
and
just
it's
sitting
it's
there.
awful.
Exactly. That's right. In clinic is very comfortable as I've got the AC, as you quite rightly said. But when I'm at home or when I'm elsewhere, then yeah, it's very tricky.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know if your theme for today, Marcel, was just to
Mhm.
make us all feel in these hot climes a bit cooler.
Right.
Yeah, but
I
we
mean,
are.
that would have been smart of me to think that frozen shoulder is to make us all feel a bit cool. I hadn't quite connected the dots there, but thank you for doing that for me.
So, frozen shoulder, this is something I get the impression, Marcel, that,
Hmm.
everybody knows the term. And
Yeah,
I've heard so many people over the years say, "Oh, I've got frozen shoulder." Now, um, first of all, what is it? How do we know that we've got it? And
yeah.
does everybody who say I've got frozen shoulder actually have frozen shoulder?
Exactly. No, it's a super duper common thing for people to say they have, particularly when you Google it, because when you Google it, you'll find that it kind of comes around to being a very common cause for shoulder pain.
Right.
But unfortunately, frozen shoulder is quite an annoying, debilitating injury that tends to happen to those people over the age of 50. It's very rare that it occurs under the age of 40. And it's more common in women than men.
Right.
And it's part of a three or sometimes four-stage process, which are one of the things I wanted to break down. But basically, when you have what's called pre-freezing or the freezing stage, so that would be
Okay.
stage one or 1.5, depending on what you read, um, then that is when you start to experience random pain in your shoulder. And if you're on camera, when you start to elevate your elbow. So if you
Right.
start to elevate your elbow or you start to want to reach for things above the shoulder height and it
Right.
gives you localized pain, but not really very specific, that can be a sign of freezing. And unfortunately, it tends to get worse at that point. So it
Okay.
gets worse and worse. And that's the freezing point, stage one.
Right. Okay. So we've got the pre-freezing slash freezing point, which is just a generalized pain when
Yep,
you elevate your arm.
exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly right. Yep. And that's the freezing stage. Now that can take up to a couple of weeks. It can take even longer, which is the downside. If you ignore that pain, then it is something that can just drag on and on and on and on. And you can have the freezing stage come on over a period of months, which is
Okay.
bonkers. If you are experiencing regular pain when moving your shoulders, you definitely want to try and get it looked at, because if you leave it and you're always experiencing pain, then you could be in the pre-freezing freezing stage for a long period of time, and then your injury is going to last a long time, and that's very debilitating and dull.
Right. Is there a kind of technical name for frozen shoulder?
Yes, adhesive capsulitis.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Adhesive capsulitis.
Yeah, so the reason it's called that, and it makes it very clear, adhesive literally means stuck together. So if you imagine, if we're on camera again, you've got, I'm creating a fist with my hand. and you cup that fist, that's what your shoulder joint looks like. It's a highly mobile joint, ball and socket, and the shoulder. And there are articulations and lubrication between the two surfaces that allow you to move very, very freely.
Right.
And it is the most vulnerable joint in the body because it's the most mobile, but it is the most mobile, and that means that it can move in different directions. But with adhesive capsulitis, what starts to happen is there's actually no known cause of we don't actually know exactly what causes adhesive capsulitis, but what's happening is you're getting inflammation either at the top of the bone, so the head of the humerus that sits inside the capsule, or conversely, the capsule that it sits inside of, that material has thickened up and has dried out and becomes like glue, and that's where the adhesive side of it comes from. And capsulitis is an inflammation of the capsule, which is what itis is, inflammation.
Right, so it is something really quite specific, and it's not just about, I've got a pain when I lift my arm, because there could be a dozen different reasons for that, couldn't there?
That's right. There are dozens of reasons why you could have pain in your shoulder. And that's why the diagnosis is very, very useful, because you could have other things going on. There could be a rotator cuff issue. There could be a postural issue. That's very common as well. I see a lot of people with postural issues. And when they have a postural issue, that's when the shoulders are not sitting correctly within the capsule in the right position when they move.
Right.
And so when they move, they're putting certain rotator cuff muscles or certain ligaments or connecting bits under strain, and that's when you can have random shoulder pain. But that's not frozen shoulder, and you don't want to have frozen shoulder if you can avoid it.
Right. Okay. So I mean, really, the way you've described it there, Marcel, you know, I think is quite helpful, because you know, I've had so many people say, "Oh, I've got frozen shoulder," and I suspect that probably in 8 out of 10 cases they haven't.
This is the thing. It's very, very common that they'll self-diagnose, and self-diagnosis is, as we know, risky and unreliable and not necessarily the best idea.
Right.
So yeah, unless you're obviously experienced or you've got the knowledge, then it can be very easy to walk a path of misdiagnosing and having frozen shoulder. At the same time, you're going to want to make sure that you are careful with your if you're trying to treat it yourself. If you think you have frozen shoulder and then you try and treat it yourself, it's very important that you don't do too much exercise, or in particular heavy resistance exercise or jerky movements. And that was one of the things I really wanted to share with the listeners, is that if you are concerned that you have adhesive capsulitis or frozen shoulder, but you haven't had it diagnosed, you haven't been to a therapist or a doctor, then you need to be very, very careful about what you do with it. So even things like carrying heavy shopping bags can irritate it or frustrate it. If you are even closing a door very rapidly or forcing something, could be a problem. Right. So it's really is something that you need to be a bit aware of. And adhesive capsulitis is one of those injuries that unfortunately is very long lasting.
Right. I think I got a little message come up on my screen there saying Dave would like to speak.
Get out, lad. Okay, muy bien.
What would you like to say, Dave?
Which language, Dave, would you like? I think you're muted. Yeah, you are.
Yeah, he's muted.
He's still muted. He's talking to himself at the moment.
He does that all the time. He has a show all morning and he talks to himself.
That'll be why. Does that help?
That sounds better, yes.
See, 30 years and I still don't know how to use the software. No, I wasn't going to say anything. I don't know why it came up that I wanted to say something.
You pressed the wrong button again, Dave, didn't you?
Probably, yeah. That's why I'm not a pilot.
All right, okay. But thank God you're not a pilot. Yeah, what does this button do?
Or if it was Marcel, I think I'm pressing the right thing here. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm pressing the wrong thing, actually. See, now Marcel's muted.
Now Marcel's muted, yes.
In my line of work, that's a problem. That's hilarious. I got a notification that I was muted. That's so funny. Are you muted, Dave?
We should have a lip reading show. That'd be great, wouldn't it?
I'm actually quite good at lip reading, so yeah, we can try that.
But Marcel, let's be honest, you might be very good at it, but yeah, lip reading on the radio is guaranteed not to work very well, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like a
it's not-
fireworks
it's not gonna
display,
bother
isn't
you.
it? Bonfire the 5th of November on the radio. What a nightmare.
Yeah. So, Marcel, I think you're emphasizing that, if people get the early signs of this, really they ignore it at their peril. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. If you ignore and you've had enduring deep shoulder pain or limiting movement for more than a week, you need to start considering getting it looked at. If you've had it for 2 weeks and it's getting worse, you definitely need to get it looked at.
Okay.
So any more than that, you're going to want to get it assessed. Now, when you have an assessment and if you are diagnosed with frozen shoulder, then you have to go through stages. There's no going from stage 1 to normality, unfortunately.
Okay.
Frozen shoulder is quite interesting in that way, in that it goes from pre-freezing freezing, which is the painful bit of movement, to frozen.
Right.
And the frozen shoulder bit is a bit better in the sense that you tend to experience less pain, but you have much less movement.
Okay.
So when you are adhered or glued or stuck, then movement of your shoulder is limited. You probably would struggle to get it to shoulder height, the elbow to get to shoulder height. You might be limited to just maybe a few degrees, 20, 30 degrees away from your rib cage. And that's obviously debilitating and limits your ability, obviously, a range of motion. And so that would be the freezing stage. And so if you've had pain, then the pain starts to diminish, but your movement is massively reduced. That's indicative of you being in stage 2, which is the frozen stage. And that is both a good thing in the sense of its progression, but obviously it definitely confirms that you have got frozen shoulder. And if you've experienced shoulder pain, you think, oh yeah, I've got frozen pain, a frozen shoulder, and then the pain goes away and you haven't had that limited of movement, then you haven't had frozen shoulder in the beginning.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And so in terms of diagnosing it, Marcel, whether you go to a therapist or to a doctor, would they diagnose it by where the pain is and what kind of movement? How would that diagnosis be done?
Diagnosing through a couple of what's called special tests. So that's where somebody like me, who's a specialist, will do some special tests to move the arm, if feasible, in certain positions to verify what's happening. I can very often feel it as well. What's quite interesting with this is that when you put the hand on the shoulder, if you move the shoulder into what's called external rotation, internal rotation, you tend to be able to feel literal resistance and or grinding. Yeah. Feel this kind of sound. It's quite odd. Yeah, it's quite interesting, and obviously it can be either painful and or limited in movement. So all these kind of factors contribute towards whether or not you have it.
So when the patient starts to squeal, there's a problem.
That's usually the sign. The sign of the squeal is like, okay, there's something going on there. Yes.
When your eyebrows are going up, and all of a sudden you go,
yeah, that exactly. When we're getting up there, exactly right.
What I didn't know though, what I found out when I dislocated my shoulder, the doctors were telling me that your arm weighs 10 kilo minimum
by itself.
Yeah, I was like, my God, because when the anaesthetic took, and they said to me, don't try and put your arm. I had to literally move it with my right hand.
Yes.
Don't put it at the side of you, lying on the bed, because the weight of it will pull you off the bed.
Right. Crazy, right? I mean, this is the thing. When we weigh ourselves, we think of ourselves as a whole. But then if you segment us, our head is surprisingly heavy. Our arms are surprisingly heavy. Our legs are even heavier. And of course, the more muscular you are, the heavier they'll be. If you're obviously overweight as well, the heavier they'll be. But generally, the more muscular you are, the heavier you are because you're much more dense. So one person's arm who's muscular could be very heavy, bizarrely. And it's fascinating. Exactly. And when you're under anesthesia as well, you tend to have much less muscle control, particularly if you've had a dislocation. So all the ligaments that help keep everything in that ball and socket locked in, under its own weight, it can just slide out as well, which is rare, but it can happen because it's just not maintaining its own tonicity. Yeah. So it's, absolutely. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, did you say just at the beginning there, Marcel, that we don't know what the sort of root cause of this is.
Correct. So we don't know the exact root cause of her frozen shoulder, but we know how it can come about.
Okay.
So, for example, I mean, what I mean by that is we don't know the physiological reason for adhesive capsulitis occurring, which is quite interesting. That even now we still don't fully understand why that happens. But what we do know is that it's related to, of course, systemic inflammation.
Right.
So, of course, if you have inflammation from various factors, and this is what again harks back to a lot of the conversations we've had in the past, which is that if you are inflamed because of dietary reasons, it can be a cause. If you are inflamed because of stress, it can be caused. If you are inflamed because of emotional reasons, it can be caused. But the most common way of it happening is through a rapid jerking sensation, either outward away from the body or an impact. And the ones that I've seen most frequently, for example, if you are in a car accident and there is a side-on impact that pushes the shoulder in towards the body, that's another reason why you can have frozen shoulder. So
Right.
it could be that your arm gets jerked out, similarly to a dislocation. And actually, dislocations are very one of the risks are that after your dislocation, you can then suffer from frozen shoulder, which is more common again in women and or persons of over a certain age. You're much less likely to suffer that if you're younger and if you're male. But yes, that's you want to be very, very careful to not get frozen shoulder after some form of side-on impact, dislocation, sharp jerking sensation. I actually once had a client who got frozen shoulder from walking her dog.
Right. Okay. And the dog's pulling or
was big and strong and was pulling her shoulder, and she got frozen shoulder. Luckily, she didn't ignore it. She had suffered for it for about 4 weeks, and we got her back on track in about 3 months, and that's fast.
Right.
That's
okay.
fast, because here's the saddest part of the whole thing.
You swapped the dog for a Chihuahua.
Well, that's what would have been a good idea, right? I did say to her, is there any way you could consider getting a smaller dog? And she's like, no, that's not an option. I'm like, okay. Is there any way you could get somebody else to hold the dog? You know, no, fine. Okay, people love their dogs, despite the injuries they get. That's fine. But the kicker, unfortunately, with frozen shoulder is that the general recovery time is 6 months to 3 years.
Wow.
My God.
Yeah. It's bonkers. That's the average recovery time for frozen shoulder, which is crazy a long period of time.
I'm just interested, that it's called, the cellulitis, and the itis, as you say, Marcel, is about inflammation. And we do know that an awful lot of problems in the joints are caused by inflammation, yeah?
Yes,
are women in general more susceptible to inflammation? I'm thinking about some of the other itises, like arthritis, for example. Are women generally more susceptible to this than men?
So this connects us really nicely to other topics in the past, in that there are a couple of reasons why that can be the case. Yes and no. There's a strong correlation between nutrition, lifestyle, and health and exercise.
Right.
So if you, for example, you can create itises if you are an excessive sporting individual. And I say this one first because this is the least likely one.
Right.
So there are, for example, long distance runners who have done many marathons, and then they get itises later in life.
Right.
But it's more common for those people who are much less active, but perhaps are overweight.
Right.
Have less muscle tone. As a result of that, the reason they're overweight is probably because they don't make the right food choices, and that contributes to systemic inflammation.
Sure.
Yeah. Now, of course, there are always variables. Hormones play a huge part. Women are far more susceptible to hormone changes than men. We know that. So women go through, particularly later in life, the change where their balance between progesterone, estrogen, and so on changes massively, and estrogen. And those things changing affect muscle tone, digestion, libido, all those different types of things that can also affect inflammation within a woman's body. Definitely.
Right,
More
okay.
so than a man. So yes, to a certain extent, women are more susceptible, but they also tend to be more self-aware than men. So they tend to take better care of themselves, usually.
Yeah, I think that in my experience is certainly true that
Yeah.
in general women listen to their bodies far more than men do.
Exactly.
Men just think that they are tanks or sort of indestructible.
Invincible.
And but women will tend, we might think, oh, they're complaining about a niggle here or whatever, but it's really more to do with the fact that they're listening to their bodies and they're saying, wait a minute, there's something doesn't feel quite right here.
Exactly. No, that's exactly right. That is exactly right. And so when we talk about treatment for adhesive capsulitis, but also for systemic inflammation, one of the most powerful lifestyle things you can do, aside from exercise, you know me, I literally think I've said it in every single show where I recommend regular exercise. It is getting into your system as many natural anti-inflammatories as you can.
Right.
And if you're listening to the show and you're not sure what that is, because everyone knows what an anti-inflammatory is, we go to Boots or we go to the pharmacy and you go and pick up anti-inflammatories, ibuprofen, for example. That is a chemical anti-inflammatory, right? And it does work in the short term, and it is recommended. Now, if you have adhesive capsulitis, if you catch it early, it can be a useful treatment protocol if you have frozen shoulder, to take ibuprofen. But from a lifestyle standpoint, if you can ingest as many natural anti-inflammatories, both when you have a problem and when you don't have a problem, it's going to increase the potential for you to not have a problem. If you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
If you're taking that as part of your daily ingestion of food, and I'm talking about things like any raw fruits and vegetables that work for you as possible. Curcumin is very, very good. Turmeric is very, very good as a natural anti-inflammatory.
Yes.
Drinking things like lemon water is very, very good for your digestive system and so on. And that's just nutritional. There's loads of different things that you can take that will help you to anti-inflame your body. And there are things that will cause inflammation. We know that processed foods are now connected to inflammation. It's now been verified by the World Health Organization that aspartame is now known as a carcinogen, which is crazy. And that's widely available in a lot of as a sweetener. So that also connects to anti-inflammatories, inflammatories. So cutting out processed foods, sugary drinks, these are all things that we've been saying for quite some time, and probably on here we're aware of that. But they're still very, very popular. They're still very, very, very much consumed. And so the more people hear that there are associated dangers to consuming fizzy drinks all the time, to having processed meals, ready meals, quick meals, things like that, processed foods, cereals as well, all of those types of things, they're not really giving you anything in the way of nutrition, and they could be contributing towards inflaming your body and as a whole.
When you're talking about cereals, are you talking about cereals that come out of a box as opposed to sort of pure cereals?
Correct, absolutely. When I refer to cereals, I'm talking about the most processed food on the planet, which are cereals from a box, like Crunchy Nut and Cheerios and cornflakes.
Yeah, sort of puffed rice and...
Puffed rice, all of that. They are, I mean, this is a topic that I think we've covered before, but they are the definition of processed food, the definition.
Yeah.
And they are fascinating in the sense that they're still allowed to be sold, despite the fact that they actually have zero nutritional value. And in order for them to be continually sold, they have to fortify it. So when they advertise fortified with iron and niacin and all that kind of stuff, it's because they have to do it, because they have zero value from a nutritional standpoint. It is literally mushed up stuff, gray stuff, that they then color and then add stuff to that comes from a separate location. So the actual thing you end up chewing on is colored, sweetened, salted, and then fortified with minerals, and because it has none of its own. It's all been completely destroyed.
You make it sound so appetizing, Marcel.
I know, right? That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping everyone's going to run out and grab a box of cornflakes. I mean, I used to love crunchy nut. At one stage in my life, I used to have crunchy nut cornflakes all the time. Oh my God, I lived on that for about a month or so when I was much younger. But nowadays, and our kids have cereal very, very rarely when they're lucky, and they love it. Of course, they love it. It's sugar and salt. Who doesn't love it?
Yeah.
But yeah.
What about Weetabix? Is Weetabix the same thing?
So Weetabix is actually one of the lesser problematic. It's still highly processed, but the reason it has quite a bland flavor is because they haven't really added that much. And I used to have Weetabix quite a bit, but you have to put sugar on Weetabix, otherwise it's just like eating cardboard in milk.
Well, yeah. I mean, I have banana with it, but that's what I have. I'll have
adding nutrients. Dave, you can't add nutrients to it. That's not fair. You've got to go. You just go hardcore. Just have it raw. Well, then,
it's like baby food, isn't it? Once the milk's on it, and then you start chopping it. It's like eating bloody rusks.
You could just get a straw. Yeah, you could just get a straw. Yeah. Just suck it up. It's fabulous. Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant for that, but for nutrition and for your body, rubbish.
Oh, right. Well, that's out the window then.
Right. Okay. Listen, gentlemen, let's take a short break. We've got Michael Armstrong, True Blue, and then we've a lot to talk about the probably the post stages, Marcel, when we come back.
Let's do that.
I think you're just about caught me. Oh, yeah.
Listen, you don't need to be an expat, and you don't even need a radio.
The best variety of music and conversation.
You're listening to Expat Radio, beaming out across France and around the world.
You caught me out there, Dave. Yeah, just that 2-second pause. It's like, is it coming? Is it not coming? This is Bill Anderson. You're listening to Expat Radio, coming live from the Costa del Sol with my regular contributor, Marcel Salazar, who's been talking us through... You have been talking frozen shoulder.
Adhesive capsulitis, yes.
Adhesive capsulitis, yeah.
Right.
I mean, adhesive capsulitis sounds sort of, I don't know, kinder than frozen shoulder, doesn't it?
Yeah, I like the technical name, and it's a very logical technical name as well. So it's a clever one. But yes, it unfortunately, when you it sounds to me always like it's a glued capsule.
Yeah,
that's what it translates to me, and that in a sense is effectively what's happened. Is that just like freezing, where it gets stuck? You know, if you get stuff stuck in your freezer, you can't get it out. It's the same as your shoulder. It just gets all glued together,
right? And
the natural lubricants within the capsule itself are diminished, and you've got inflammation around the capsule that stops the joint moving freely.
Right. So, Marcel, you know, you've mentioned about going to possibly see a doctor, or going to see a therapist. You know, if people catch this early enough, what do you think? And I know you'll give us a sort of balanced view on this. What do you think the best approach is? Is it just go and see your medic, or go to a good therapist? You know, which is going to I don't know, either help to avoid it getting worse, or just improve what the current situation is.
Yeah. So your average physio isn't going to be able to prescribe medication. Now, I very rarely like to recommend medication, but in this case, under these circumstances, anti-inflammatories, chemical anti-inflammatories, are effective for both mitigating pain and being able to literally reduce systemic inflammation in your body.
Right.
So if you have the condition, that's where the doctor comes in handy, because the doctor is going to be able to make a prescription, which you're then going to be able to collect. Now, it depends on the severity of the prescription. So you can obviously buy ibuprofen, OTC, which means over the counter. So you can do that easily yourself if you know you want to do that. And obviously a physio can suggest that without prescribing it. But a doctor can recommend stronger anti-inflammatories, things like diclofenac, which is a stronger ibuprofen. would then be a prescription-based medication, which you could also use, which is useful again for pain and anti-inflammatories or reducing the inflammation. So really probably both. But for what the doctor will do, or what the doctor should do, is recommend going to a therapist, because they're the one that are going to do the hands-on stuff for the recovery.
Right. Okay.
So so frozen shoulder will go away by itself, but like I said before, it could take up to 3 years.
Okay. Right.
And that's a long period of time. It could go away before, fingers crossed. But if you have confirmed adhesive capsulitis and you've been suffering for, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, and it's not really changing, and you've taken medication because you've been to see a doctor, you definitely want to consider going to a therapist. Now, if you want to be more proactive about it, going to a therapist would be your absolute natural port of call.
Right.
Should be.
Yeah, and I think it's probably worth saying that people shouldn't just take anti-inflammatories ad infinitum, should they?
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely.
So you know, even if you're buying something over the counter, if you're having to keep taking them, I mean, they're not going to make you high, but if you're having to keep taking them because the pain keeps on coming back, then there has to be a point at which, you know, it's not for me to say, it's like, enough. This is enough anti-inflammatories. You need to sort of start looking at some alternative approaches to this. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. And to be honest, the anti-inflammatories is really just a small part of your recovery. And unfortunately, you're absolutely right in that it's certainly not something you want to continue taking indefinitely. But if you have adhesive capsulitis, the chances are is that you are going to need to take them for an extended period of time. Right. But that is a decision that you make, and you make with your doctor under guidance.
Yeah.
But also, if you're going to accelerate your recovery, you're going to want to see a therapist, because there are things that therapist can do, such as stretching, strengthening, postural checks, things like that are going to accelerate your recovery. If you don't go to a therapist for that reason, or if your doctor doesn't recommend it, then it's just going to take longer. It's as simple as that.
And to be honest, Marcel, you're also more likely to get a conversation about nutrition and diet from your therapist than you are from your doctor.
Much more likely.
Yeah.
Much more likely. Certainly if you come to somebody like me, you're 100% going to have a conversation about that. And that is that sometimes can be problematic, because sometimes a client doesn't necessarily want to be real with themselves. And it might be easier just to sort of pop the pills and see how you get on. And I get that. There's some people that do that. But most of my clients who come to me are aware that they might need to make some changes. And if they adopt those changes and take on board advice, things happen faster.
Yeah.
And that just gets better.
I mean, Dave is still traumatized there about his Weetabix. You know, he's really struggling with the idea of no more Weetabix.
Yeah. He's still muted as well, so he hasn't even switched it off.
I'm thinking that, you know, when I was trying to think then what I could have instead of Weetabix, but I'm still struggling. I'm trying to go through all the cereals in my head that you can have. But obviously, now you've told me that, then I mean, that was the other thing I was going to say. That crunchy nut. It's not crunchy nut over here. It's the equivalent of muesli, but that you can get in France. But it looks there's bits of chocolate in it. Looks lovely.
Oh yeah.
Now you've told me that. I mean, I might as well be chewing on a bloody cardboard box for all I know, with a bit of chocolate.
Right. Yeah, you're right. You might as well be chewing on a cardboard box. There's lots of alternative things you can have for breakfast. For example, avocado. Avocado is fantastic because it's satiating. It's full of fats, but good fats. You can have it with honey. Natural honey is amazing. If you can find real bread, go on.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say I've not tried it with honey. I know I like avocado, but I've not tried it with honey.
Okay, this is a little bit of a family secret, but it's not really a secret. And now I'm letting it out to the wide world.
And you're claiming copyright on it, yeah?
I'm totally claiming it. This is mine, okay? If you try it and you love it, you need to come back to me, okay? Because I own this, kind of. Not really.
Tell us our avocados.
Avocado and honey, and of course, obviously, you want to get the best avocado you can and natural honey as best you can. It's the best toast. I mean, if you're in France, so hopefully you get good bread as well. Ideally, not supermarket bread, but like boulangerie bread, toasted, avocado, honey, or honey on the bottom, avocado on top. Slice it up. Oh my word, it will change your life forever.
Right.
I love it.
Do you put butter or anything on the bread?
Oh, that's a choice. That's a total choice. I like it with a bit of butter, but it doesn't make any difference because you don't really taste that. If you have real butter, again, which is quite salty, but that's nice. That's amazing. Oh, that's so good. But you don't have to have butter if you don't need it.
Right.
I love it.
I'm like a St. Bernard now. I'm dribbling in.
Yeah, I tell you, I'm losing it. I'm getting hungry.
It's going in Bill's beard. He's dribbling down. I think he's on the case.
Yeah, well, I use a lot of oats. But just steel cut oats, none of this sort of 5-minute oats and stuff like that comes in a box. You know, it just comes in a bag. It's steel cut, and I would have that quite often with just natural yogurt like Greek yogurt and some fermented milk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good.
And I can add, if I want to sweeten it, I'll use a couple of drops of stevia.
Okay.
And then berries and some flax seeds or something like that on the top, and it's a really good. Well, it feels quite a substantial.
I mean, that's a bit
breakfast.
like a porridge, right? But you're not heating it.
We're not cooking the oats. No, just have the oats raw.
That's so high in fiber. That's so high in carbohydrate. Then you've got a little bit of the sugars from the fruit and so on. I mean, that's fantastic, and it's very, very, very good for you. And that's the reason why you're glowing, Bill.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't look 75, do I?
No.
That's the reason why he's so fast on his feet as well. If that's going through like a train, my God.
The shine just from your head alone is spectacular. I mean, it is unreal.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I don't even need to polish the head anymore. You know, I just get up in the morning and it glows.
It's a natural shine. I know. Imagine your wife wakes up to 2 suns. You know,
when they wake up in the morning, they have the theme music to the Saint playing straight away on the alarm clock. When he gets out of bed,
he emerges like the rising sun.
Yeah, but you know, I had one spell, Marcel. I was working away from home, and I thought, I'm not going to name the cereal, but I thought I'll get a cereal for the morning.
Yeah.
And I used to head off Monday morning, come home Friday night, and when I came home, this was supposed to be a good cereal, right?
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't Weetabix, but it was supposed to be a good cereal.
Yeah.
And Vicky said, "What's happened to you?" And I said, "I don't know what." And she said, "You're all bloated."
Straight away.
And I said, "Well, I thought the shirt was feeling a bit tight."
Yeah.
And she said, "What have you changed in your diet?" And I said, "Well, I've started just having some cereal in the morning." Mm-hmm. And she said, "Well, bin it." And actually, it's exactly what I did. And whatever bloating there was just disappeared, within days.
Yep.
So,
cereal, white bread, all of those extremely processed.
Right.
Absolutely right. And doesn't tend to work. And if you are listening, and exactly as you've just said, if you experience bloating after breakfast, you seriously need to look at what you're eating. And the chances are it's probably white bread or highly processed bread and or cereal.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Marcel, to sort of move the thing on a bit, you know, the person has got the frozen shoulder, okay?
Yeah.
And it can be quite easily diagnosed by the range of movement and the discomfort and whatever. Mm-hmm. What happens then?
So we've been through the pre-freezing, we've frozen. Now stage 2 is frozen, which means limited range of motion, but not quite so much pain. And then you get the thawing stage. So thawing, as the name would suggest, is when you start to get a little bit more movement. Now, usually thawing is less painful than the freezing stage, but not always.
Right.
So if you are experiencing that you've had the pain, then you've had the limited movement, and then you find that the movement starts to come back and you're getting less pain, it means you're on the road to recovery, you're at stage 3, and then you're thawing out. And again, this can take a couple of weeks, it can take a few months, it just depends on how your body copes with it. but that's the next stage. It's literally called the thawing stage. And again, when you work with a therapist like myself, the goal is to get you to that point as quickly as possible, where your range of motion is recovered as quickly as possible, and as pain-free as possible as well. But it is crucial that it is done carefully and gently and in a controlled way.
Yeah, because if people think, oh, I've got more movement, and they think they can just go straight back to normal, that could, I guess, aggravate it again, could it?
Exactly right. Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's
so, but by the stage that you're at the thawing, is your GP going to be able to do anything to help at that stage, or is it more likely that a good therapist is going to do far more for that recovery?
The only thing you're going to want to see your GP for is for a checkup. They're not going to do anything other than either re-prescribe, or they might be able to suggest exercises. I don't know of one that has ever done that, but I mean, they might be able to suggest, or obviously then directly refer you to the system for physiotherapy if you're able to do that. But otherwise, all the work is going to be done with a therapist. So either the physiotherapist prescribed by the doctor, if the doctor's good, or a private therapist like myself, if you are going to see them. That work is going to be done with them, and it'll be over a period of time based on your rate of recovery.
Yeah, and I know every country is different, Marcel, but here, unless you have private healthcare, the chances of getting access, and we have a very good healthcare system, I'm not knocking it at all, but the chances of getting access to a physio through the healthcare system at the time that you really need it is going to be fairly low, isn't it?
Again, just like the UK, it's similar here. They have a hugely overworked continuity health system. So things like physiotherapy can take months to get involved with. Yeah. And the duration of therapy is usually very, very short in terms of the amount of time spent with a physio is very, very little. Right. But the efficacy, one hopes, would be very, very good. Once you do get to see that individual, then obviously based on their experience and what they do, can all be very, very effective. But I have personal experience of clients who have tried to go through the system and end up booking with me because they can see me in a much shorter period of time and get their therapy underway.
But I think that is fairly typical of a lot of things. As I say, we have an excellent public healthcare system here in Spain, but it's under the same kind of stresses and pressures as in many countries, certainly in the UK, from what I hear. And unless something is urgent, if you have a heart attack, you'll get seen. There's no problem. But for a lot of other things, people waiting for I don't know, hip replacements or knee replacements or other types of interventions that are not necessarily life-threatening. A lot of people end up going private because they can get things done when they need to, when they need it to be done. Yeah.
Exactly right. Yep, that's exactly the way it works. And very often I've had patients who just couldn't wait any longer. And then it turned out that they were perhaps better suited to having some physical therapy because that actually allowed them to continue in their life before requiring surgery, or put it conversely, their lives are becoming more and more and more and more limited. And I've said to them, look, you need to get the ball rolling for the possibility of having some form of surgical intervention, because this isn't going to get any better. We can maintain it, or we can increase longevity, but it might be that you're going to have to get this done. Now, in certain circumstances, even for adhesive capsulitis, corticosteroid injection, which is a more direct treatment protocol for the shoulder, is implicated. And that is an option for certain people. But just to level that out, corticosteroid injection has a 50-50 success rate, and it has an expected success rate of 3 months.
Okay.
So not all doctors explain that to patients. They don't always tell them that those are the pros and cons. Yes, it may work. It's 50-50. And if it does work, it's proven that if it does work, it will last a maximum of 3 months.
Yeah. But
There are some individuals that it works really, really well for, and it doesn't create a problem. But the majority are that it's 50-50 success, and then the maximum lifeline of 3 months.
Yeah.
Could be much less.
But I remember a lot of years ago I had tennis elbow. And I did go to the doctor because I wasn't sure what to do with it in those days. And he said, well, I could give you an injection in the joint. And I'm saying, and will it work? Well, I'm not very sure. Will it hurt? Oh, yeah. And I'm going, okay.
That he knows. That he knows. But the other thing, and nothing has changed. With corticosteroids, nothing has changed in that capacity. It's going to hurt at the time, goes away. Funnily enough, if I'm honest, I've actually had golfer's elbow, despite not being a golfer. I've had golfer's elbow, and I also wanted to try and see what would happen with corticosteroids. This was many years ago. This was about 8 years ago. And it was uncomfortable to have, and it did nothing for me. Literally nothing.
Right.
So I knew all the implications, but I thought, well, you know what? I need to get a bit of empathy with this. I've tried a couple of alternatives. Let's give it a go. And it didn't work at all. So that was unfortunate for me. But there have been other clients and friends and so on who it has worked for. So it just depends.
Okay, Marcel, we're coming towards the end of our time. Can I just say, if people are interested in your work, you've been very active on your YouTube channel.
Yes.
Which is,
well, if you go to youtube.com/Marcel Salazar Physical Therapy, or Strong for Life Physical Therapy, if you search that in the search bar. Strong for Life Physical Therapy. There's a couple of other companies with a similar name. They kind of pinched it after I came up with it. Again, I'm owning it, but I can't copyright it. So Strong for Life Physical Therapy, and you can't miss my logo. And there's lots of good content on there. I'm trying to put as much as I can with the help of my lovely wife. Where we do lots of different things like stretching and strength work for different parts of your body. So there should be plenty on there, as well as, of course, on my social media from Instagram, which again is instagram.com/strongforlife.me. It's the same for Facebook, facebook.com/strongforlife.me. And if you want to find my website, strongforlife.me. So it's really easy.
Marcel, and I have to say, I've watched a lot of your videos, and I think they're very, very informative, very simple to follow, which I think is really important. They're not 3 hours long. No. They're really short, to the point, and I think very helpful. Marcel, can I just thank you once again for joining me today?
Yes. So
always very informative, and a bit of fun too. So. Good. Thank you, Marcel, and hopefully we'll see you at the end of next month.
You will. You absolutely will. And next month, I actually want to target pelvic floor.
Pelvic floor. Okay.
Yeah. Very important.
I shall do some research on the pelvic floor.
Yes, indeed. Do so. For men and women. Very important.
Okay.
Very important. Yeah,
Marcel,
we'll get into it.
Marcel, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Lovely to speak to you as always. Dave in France, thank you so much for organising things in the background. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
I'll keep on working until the sun goes down.